Welcome to Trash Talk Reverse. I'm Harry, and today is Blackwater Day, Season 2, Episode 9. Last episode was kind of a hot mess. Definitely the worst episode of the season so far, which is unfortunate because it's actually been a pretty strong season. The weird part is, although I don't really like Stannis, his scene last episode was actually pretty good, and it actually felt like they were leading up to the attack on King's Landing from the tone, and it just built that anticipation. But on the flip side, the Tyrion stuff didn't really feel like that. On the surface, it's like, oh, we're trying to figure out how to deal with the siege, and oh, Joffrey wants to fight, and oh, that's where Stannis' ships are coming. But there was no urgency to any of it, despite how much time we spent with Tyrion in that episode alone, in contrast to Stannis in the past several episodes. Also, if you remember, I said earlier in the season, I think it was a cop-out to have Stannis kill Renly because Stannis versus Tyrion just doesn't feel as complex as Renly and Robb versus Tyrion, because in that case, we want both sides to win, or we have some sort of emotional stake in both sides. Whereas here, even with Davos on Team Stannis, no one really wants to see him win over Tyrion, and he won't. But hopefully the battle itself will find a way to be interesting. Although I remember that image of Cersei with Tommen at the very end, I don't remember if this episode is centered exclusively on Blackwater or if they do cut away to other storylines. So without further ado, let's jump right in. This one's also written by the author. Last season's episode 8 was written by the author. And I remember, although the episode itself wasn't super interesting, it did do some pretty nice transitions from scene to scene.
You're coming home? King's Landing hasn't been home for 20 years. Dodging the royal fleet.
This is the royal fleet. The people of King's Landing did not choose the false King Joffrey Baratheon. Our army outnumbered theirs 5 to 1.
And the men guarding the walls, when they see you, they don't see a liberator. They see a stranger come to set their city on fire.
No faith in my captain.
That was a nice scene. Some of the Sun's dialogue was a little weird, but it did a good job building the suspense and also giving us some relevant information in an interesting way.
I won't let them hurt you.
Literally, who are you? You're not fighting in the battle.
Do you remember what you said when you met me in your tent? I should make love to you like it was your last day on this earth.
Didn't care for that scene at all. Like, there's just nothing compelling about Shay, so it seems like she only exists so that Tyrion has somebody to talk to.
Also to offer guidance and,
If you could-
if anything, back in the days of King...
You brought me something?
Essence of nightshade is as dangerous as it is efficacious. A single drop in a cup of wine, 3 drops, 10 drops, however.
I know what 10 drops will bring.
If I may ask.
You may not.
A siege is very...
Be careful on the stairs, Grandmaster. There are so many.
Apart from how that scene started with some of that blabbing from Maester Pycelle, that was a pretty good scene, especially when he hands her the nightshade and that music comes in. Even then, Pycelle did keep blabbing for quite a bit, and they could have cut that down. But regardless, with him saying 10 drops will bring and her kind of cutting him off is an interesting way to suggest what she needs the nightshade for without having to directly tell us. Though I'm almost wondering if it wouldn't have been more impactful if he just handed her the nightshade and said, here's the nightshade. Because the audience doesn't need as much information as the writers might think we do. So that would have been a good way to clean up the scene, but regardless, it still works really well in establishing what it's trying to establish.
And I like your nose. How many times you break it?
My mum smacked me with an iron poke, got in a scrap with a few older boys. You don't want to know about third time.
Poor nose.
You'll be halfway up your ass before the night's through.
Nothing about this was interesting or amusing. I would rather Bronn and Tyrion have had a conversation with each other about the upcoming fight than the scenes that we got. And again, it's the way that Game of Thrones does sex scenes. They're used in order to convey random exposition about somebody because they couldn't find any interesting way to do it. And they're like, oh, well, nobody's gonna care unless we put a naked girl on the screen. And that's a sign of weak writing. If you need something external to get people to care about the actual meat of what you're talking about, then that's a problem.
This round's on me.
You think you're a hard man?
We've got beautiful women, and all you want is to put one of us in the cold ground with no women to keep us company.
Oh, there's women in the ground. I put some there myself.
So the Hound shows up and the mood sours, which, okay, makes sense. And then Bronn's talking about, like, you want to put one of us in the ground. Like, did we miss a few lines? Cause where did this come from?
Killing's the thing you love. You're just like me. Your Lord Im's going to miss you.
I expect you will someday.
Didn't care for that scene at all. Really, what was the point of it? I mean, technically the point is to show, oh, the Hound is kind of ostracized from everybody else, and he gets to point out, even though y'all are looking down on me, you like killing too. On the surface, it's like, we get why that's there, but there's no actual purpose for it. The episode didn't call for that scene, if that makes sense. In terms of the story world, and in terms of the writing process, and I don't know how to explain it exactly, but there are sometimes scenes that you feel like they wanted to throw in here because they wanted to show X, Y, and Z, but nothing in the episode has actually called for that scene. It's not something the audience was wondering about. It's not something that the story really needed at this particular moment. It's more like, oh, we got to put this in here somewhere, so let's just do it here and check it off. And part of that has to do with that context thing that I was talking about earlier in this season. Content and context. The context doesn't set up for or call for any sort of confrontation between the Hound and Bronn. So it happens, and it's kind of like, I guess they kind of just wanted to be dramatic before the bells come in. And while some of the content there could have worked, right? Like them kind of trying to square up and then the bells bells ringing and then being like, okay, well, we gotta go. If framed in a different context, it would have worked. And even if that content itself had been strengthened, it could have worked, because the idea is basically even people within the same camp don't like each other, but they have to put their differences aside in order to deal with this battle. But that content got completely lost to the point where I don't even know if that was the intention. I wish it was the intention, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like they just wanted to give the Hound and Bronn a moment before the battle starts.
I've always hated the bells. They ring for horror. A dead king, a city under siege.
A wedding? As if you don't know the name of every boy in town.
I'm not entirely sure what you're suggesting.
I'm entirely sure you're entirely sure what I'm suggesting.
Do you trust him?
The map.
Be 20 miles of tunnels beneath the city.
The Targaryens built their city to withstand a siege, and to provide escape. You believe in what you see. I don't believe I've ever told you how I was cut. The dark arts have provided Lord Stannis with his armies. For a man in service to such powers to sit on the Iron Throne, I can think of nothing worse.
I believe you are the only man who can stop him.
That was a really captivating scene. From start to finish, the dialogue just flowed really well. And even the directional choices, like when Varys said, "Have I ever told you how I've been cut?" and it cut to a close-up of Podrick kind of looking down, it just allowed us as the audience to feel very involved in that scene, which is obviously a very private conversation. In fact, Varys went the extra mile to make sure that they were among trusted company, and the acting from both Tyrion and Varys, especially Varys in that scene, like you can just feel how desperate he is to win this. And it almost redeems for me the fact that it's going to be Tyrion versus Stannis, who we don't like and we don't care about. Not entirely, because I still think it would have been better if we sided with people on both sides of the barricade, but at least we're getting some of that buildup from the King's Landing perspective that we were missing in the last episode, as I mentioned in the intro of this video. And especially with Varys, because this is not a character we know much about, with good reason. He keeps things secret about himself, but this is like his moment of vulnerability. We learn more about him, we get a hint at some of the things he's been through, and this is important because it explains why Varys is the way he is, why he's on Team Tyrion, why in the future he will continue to be on Team Tyrion. And by giving us just that tiny bit of backstory, this scene has set the audience up, if we weren't already, to be on Team Tyrion and Varys for the duration of this episode, and to be on Team Tyrion and Varys going forward, and to understand something about Varys' belief system regarding people like Melisandre that participate in this sort of dark magic or whatever. But the real question is, how much of this will be carried out in the future? We already know that Varys is going to save Tyrion at the end of season 4 and take him to Dany in the east, but I'm just curious now if we're going to get more out of this conversation and the way that Varys and Tyrion have been set up so far. And going off that similar note, it was definitely smart to start this episode with Davos and his son rather than with Stannis, because we don't like Stannis, but we do kind of like Davos. I don't really like his son either. I think he's annoying, but if Stannis loses, Davos is on the losing team, and that's not something we want. And it adds just a tiny bit of complexity to what is otherwise pretty cut and dry, black and white sort of setup. And even though Joffrey sucks, the Lannisters in this season have not truly been villains, especially with Tyrion in their boat, while Stannis has in fact committed a villainous act. So even with Davos in his boat, no pun intended, it's still pretty cut and dry who we want to see win and who we want to see lose. But at least they tried to give this situation a bit of complexity by showing the battle through Davos's eyes.
Do you know how to use that?
No, I watched my brother chopping wood.
I saw you kill a man with a shield. Don't get killed.
Nor you, my friend.
Are we friends now?
Just because I pay you for your services doesn't diminish our friendship.
Enhances it.
Fancy word for a sellsword.
Been spending time with fancy folk?
Kind of a meh conversation, but it does the job.
Stay safe, my lady.
And you, my lion.
Y'all better hope nobody heard that.
Taste my uncle's blood.
Will you slay him yourself?
Stannis is fool enough to come near me.
So you'll be outside the gates fighting in the vanguard.
A king doesn't discuss battle plans with stupid girls.
I'm stupid. Of course you'll be in the vanguard. They say my brother Rob always goes where the fighting is thickest, and he's only a pretender.
My brother's turn will come, then you can lick his blood off heart eater too.
That part of the scene was definitely a lot better, seeing the way Sansa's fighting back. Like, I'm so stupid, of course you're gonna be in the vanguard, right at the front, fighting the bad guys. Duh. And just seeing Joffrey react to that. That was really well done. And overall, closing the scene with Joffrey essentially putting her back in her place, like your brother's gonna be next, just very well crafted in terms of dialogue, pacing, structure.
Hound, tell the Hound that his king has asked him a question.
Lancel, tell the Hound to tell the King that the Hound is extremely busy.
Cut you in half. You'll do without a second thought.
Make me the quarterman. No signal, no plan. No plan, and Stannis Baratheon sacks the city, takes the Iron Throne. Put your pinch little head atop a gate somewhere.
Although I like the urgency of Tyrion's speech towards that end, the rest of that scene was a bit meh. It's like they were trying to dress up what would otherwise have been a much shorter scene, but I think it would have been okay for the scene to have been more straight and to the point.
Your red flower's still blooming. He's here to defend us. But we have guards to defend us. Should the city fall, they'll be the first ones out of the door.
The lads caught a groom and two maids trying to sneak away with a stolen horse and some gold cups.
Put their heads on spikes outside the stables as a warning. The only way to keep the small folk loyal is to make certain they fear you more than they do the enemy. Remember that if you ever hope to become a queen. You said he was here to protect us. Traitors are a danger to us all. More wine.
Interesting scene, interesting information that Cersei imparted on Sansa. I do want to take this time to point out that even though this is technically a fantasy, George R. R. Martin loves to say that it's based on like real medieval society. And if that were the case, the women would not just be chilling underground doing nothing. And girls like Sansa Sansa would probably be too young to have their periods just because of the lifestyle of people in that time. Most girls wouldn't be getting their blood until 15, 16. So that's just something to keep in mind, that this isn't actually an accurate representation of medieval society, even though it pretends to be, and it shouldn't be taken as such, even though it is a fantasy. I know some people still see it as like, oh, this is how it really was. Well, no, it actually wasn't. But the actual content of the scene itself and Cersei's way of ruling is interesting to see, and especially the way Sansa is learning about that from Cersei.
Hold fast.
What are you doing? We need to attack them. There's only one ship. Where the rest of them?
There's only one ship.
What? There's no one on board.
Wildfire.
Mothers! Get down!
That looked cool. Not only did that look cool, but just the suspense of everything leading up to it was really well crafted. Like, just really well done. However, it reflects badly on the last episode, where we had essentially what was a bunch of filler scenes of Tyrion kind of sitting around trying to plan stuff. Because clearly he already had this plan into place. Honestly, since he found out about the wildfire, which I believe was episode 5 or 6, or maybe he's been working on the plan behind the scenes, which is fine. They don't need to show us that. Like, it worked perfectly just the way it happened. It just makes the last episode's planning and preparation scenes look kind of like they threw those in there in order to kind of pad the runtime, talking about stuff that's not important, except for Bronn's one line about it's going to be the starvation that kills people. But regardless, this is a great scene. I wish they'd maybe gone a bit closer in on the Hound because of his burning backstory, so we could feel the impact seeing this has on him. They did cut to him, and I think that was the goal of them cutting to him in that moment, but you couldn't really feel that impact because it was like cut to the Hound and then move on. Maybe just cutting a bit closer and then staying on him longer as we see him react, and then cutting away.
Hundreds will die. Thousands.
The way he said thousands, like he really doesn't care what he has to do to win this. So, great characterization with just one line.
Joffrey is mine. Oh, shut up, you little fool. Praying to the gods to have mercy on us all. The gods have no mercy, that's why they're gods. My father told me that when he caught me praying. My mother had just died. I thought that if I prayed very, very hard, gods would return my mother to me.
Your father doesn't believe in the gods?
I feel like for Sansa to react to what Cersei just said by saying your dad doesn't believe in the gods feels random. Like that's what she got out of her story. Why not something like, so because of that you don't believe anymore?
Shut up inside with this flock of frightened hens. Hens will return to their cocks. How my courage inspired them. Lifted their spirits.
And if the city should fall?
You'd like that, wouldn't you? Tears aren't a woman's only weapon. The best one's between your legs. Learn how to use it. If the city falls, these fine women, half of them will have bastards in their bellies come the morning. When a man's blood is up, anything with tits looks good. Precious thing like you will look a slice of cake just waiting to be eaten.
Drunk Cersei is really quite interesting. Like, she has no filter. She can just say whatever she wants. She can just be like, yeah, this is how things are going to be. Everyone's screwed. And you can just see her sort of cynical attitude coming through. You even get a sense of that light internal misogyny deep within her from just living in this society. The way she's like, oh, these flock of hens. And her characterization in this scene is just really well done. But it actually kind of irritates me a bit because I'm thinking maybe Cersei shouldn't have gone full villain. Like, was that really the best decision for her character? Cersei seems like the kind of person that even though we don't like her, she very much gives survivor amongst the rubble. You know, I feel like in the context of the story, she's the type of person who, despite everything happening, may not end up on the throne, but may still have ended up surviving in the end. So I'm curious to see how they're going to really turn her into the main villain of the show and if that growth is going to be there at all. Because right now, as far as I can remember, her becoming the villain is just because she loses her kids, she gets yelled at and taunted through the streets, and she's desperate to hold on to the power. On the surface, maybe okay. And yeah, we know that she already did execute some villainous behavior in season 1, but she still doesn't strike me as a true villain. And it's not like bad stuff hasn't happened to her before. So will losing everything really turn her into a villain? I don't know. I guess we'll have to see the way they develop that arc.
Any of these flaming fucking arrows come near me, I'll strangle you with your own guts.
And because of that little thing the Hound said right then, again, it would have been more impactful if earlier in the episode they had spent a bit more time on that close-up shot.
When we were young, Jamie and I, we looked so much alike. Could never understand why they treated us differently. Jamie was taught to fight, and I was taught to smile. He was heir to Castle Rock, and I was sold to some stranger like a horse to be ridden whenever he desired. You were Robert's queen.
It doesn't make sense for Sansa to respond like that, saying, but you were Robert's queen. Girl, at this point, given everything that you've witnessed and the number of conversations you've had with Cersei, you already know about this common ground you share, where you hate the person you're supposed to marry.
How long have you been in Lady Sansa's service? When did you leave Laura? I had a Lorathi handmaiden once, but she was a nobleman's daughter. When did you come to Westeros? From Lorathi commoner to the Red Keep in 10 years, all without learning how to curtsy. Tell us a story, Shay. When I was 13,
This is a really interesting dynamic because we obviously know Shay is close to Tyrion, and we know that Tyrion doesn't want Cersei to know about her, which is why he and Varys put her in Sansa's care. And again, I must go back to last episode. That whole scene of Cersei being like, I found your whore and it's Roz, just really takes that tension away from this scene. Not entirely. Obviously, the scene still has tension in and of itself because it's well crafted and because of the setup of the conflict ahead of time. But if they had just taken that scene out, this would have been an even bigger deal. Because as of right now, Cersei thinks that she has Tyrion's whore. But if up until now, she didn't have anything on Tyrion, it makes it just that much easier to connect the dots. Not that she's going to connect the dots here, but right now, the thought of, oh, maybe I got the wrong girl for Tyrion isn't even going to cross Cersei's mind. And so even though this scene is showing them going in a direction that could potentially be dangerous for Shae, with Cersei asking all these questions and knowing so much, all of that would have been elevated a lot more if we didn't have that terrible scene last episode. Especially because we already know Cersei said before, when Tyrion was sending Myrcella away, one day I'm going to find someone you love and take her from you. We already know that that's hovering in the air. We also had the scene in episode 7 with Tyrion and Cersei almost kind of bonding. So then to go from that to, oh, I'm going to ruin Roz's life if you don't keep Joffrey safe during the battle, to then go to this, it just feels disjointed.
Where's Joffrey? Bring him back inside at once.
The king's presence is good for morale.
When I told you about Sir Ilyn earlier, I lied. He's here for us. Stannis may take the city, he may take the throne, but he will not take us alive.
Really interesting way to end that scene. I wonder if there's going to be some further development down the line, because Ilyn Payne is on Arya's kill list, and Sansa obviously saw him kill Ned, so I'm just wondering if they're going to take that further at some point. Okay, so they had Bronn save the Hound, and I'm guessing that's why they put in that scene before. But again, this just makes that scene look even worse, because it's not like they've had a whole season worth of animosity building up against each other, and now he saves the guy that he's been beefing with. It's like they threw in that one scene of them not getting along in order to make this a powerful moment. And that actually takes away from it, because we haven't developed any sort of animosity between Bronn and the Hound for this to have any sort of impact at all, beyond that one shoehorned scene.
Can I get you some iced milk and a nice bowl of raspberries too?
I'm dead.
I command you to go back out there and fight!
But they're going to take this city, your king's city. Fuck the king.
That's a big character moment for the Hound, and while they've done a good job in this episode of showing him kind of go through the battle being like, everyone better be killing people or I'll do terrible things to you, but then being confronted with the loss and the fire and coming back and being like, screw y'all, I'm out of here. That's all well done. But I wish throughout the season that we had gotten more in terms of how the Hound has been giving so much to this family, and so then this would become like the straw that broke the camel's back.
The Queen has sent me to bring you back to the Red Keep.
What would you have me do?
Get down there and lead your people against the invaders who want to kill them.
Sir Boris Samandon, stay with my uncle and represent the king on the field of battle.
It kind of sucks to see Joffrey leave. We know that he's a coward, so it's not far-fetched that he would leave. Like, it makes sense that he would do this. But I feel like for the first time in this whole season, the Joffrey we've seen during battle is closest to the real version of Joffrey that this season forgot about. Remember I said last season we got all these different sides to Joffrey, even though they were disjointed. But then this season, we got a much better developed Joffrey, but it was just this one-dimensional version of Joffrey that we got. This battle is the first time that those two have kind of come together. A well-developed Joffrey, but also a multi-dimensional Joffrey. Seeing the way he's barking orders, telling everyone to get out there and kill the bad guys, telling Tyrion to do something, and especially since he just screamed at the Hound to get back out there and fight, I wish he had not made this decision. I know this story was written with the idea that Joffrey was going to be a villain and he was going to be a bad guy and blah blah blah. It's kind of a disservice though, because there's potential there for more than just this one-dimensional villain kid, especially since we have both Tyrion and Lancel here to say otherwise. Tyrion has spent this battle telling Joffrey to shut the hell up and let me do what I'm gonna do. He spent the season trying to be the parent that Cersei can't be, sort of trying to rein in Joffrey. Yeah, he said he was a lost cause earlier in the season, but he's not even gonna try to stop Joffrey. He's not even gonna try to say something. And I know Lancel probably wouldn't say something directly to Joffrey, but we saw him when he was talking to Cersei, like, the king needs to be upfront with all these people. And we know that Lancel works for Tyrion, so Tyrion could have at least had somebody there to back him up as he tells Joffrey, hey, we need you to do this. And furthermore, Tyrion could have brought up, you know, your dad, Robert, he had to deal with this sort of thing. You think he was just sitting on his ass doing nothing? You think he went crying back to his mom? That would have been a great direction for Tyrion to go. But that's something that's been underdeveloped in the show. I don't know exactly how much it's developed in the books. I do remember that Joffrey was the one who sent the assassin after Bran in the book because he wanted to please his dad. So they had developed at least some semblance of, oh, Joffrey needs to please his dad desperately. And I think we did maybe get a tiny bit of that last season with him at least looking sad when Robert was dying, and even ashamed earlier when Robert was like, you let a little girl disarm you. Like, there were just tiny, tiny, tiny hints of something that they could have further developed with this idea that Joffrey was desperate for Robert's approval. And I think this moment would have been a great moment to bring that back into the fold, for Tyrion to be like, dude, your dad wouldn't have done this. So whether or not Joffrey would then be like, yeah, screw it, I'll stay with you because I'm desperate to get my dad's approval even though he's dead, and I'm desperate to be seen as a real authority figure, because remember, this whole season he's been struggling with feeling like his authority is being questioned, especially in regard to Tyrion being the one to give people commands all the time. I feel like it definitely could have been interesting for Joffrey to then be like, you know, this is my chance to kind of show that I'm worthy of being listened to, of sort of proving my authority, of not being the disappointment that my dad thought I was, and staying in the battle. That might not necessarily have been how George R. R. Martin wanted the character of Joffrey to go, or his storyline to go, but I think that would have been a really interesting idea to explore. And even if Joffrey wasn't going to stay and fight, at least have Tyrion say something so that Joffrey has some sort of an internal conflict about leaving. Because throughout the battle, we've seen him being this sort of abrasive person, like go out and fight, but also being kind of scared. I think we couldn't see that, especially in this scene. But I think the way things unfolded here stripped away what could have been a much more impactful character moment for Joffrey, regardless of whether he chose to stay or go.
I'll lead the attack. I'll lead the attack!
And I understand they had Joffrey go so that they can have Tyrion have his little moment and be like, well, the king's gone, but I'll be here to lead the attack. And this dwarf that everybody keeps making fun of, well, guess what? I'm going to be the one to lead you guys to battle, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, sure, but don't sacrifice Joffrey's character development for the sake of Tyrion's, if that makes sense.
Men! Men! They say I'm half a man, but what does that make the lot of you?
And they're out the gate.
There's another way out. Don't fight for your king. Don't fight for riches because he won't get any. It's your city Stannis means to sack. It will be your houses he burns. There are brave men knocking at our door. Let's go kill them.
His motivational speech was pretty good, but the way it transitioned to, these are brave men knocking at your door, let's go kill them. Like, I get the sentiment there. I get that that's a great way to end the speech. They just needed a couple more lines to connect those two otherwise disjointed bits of his speech. I also want to say, I think it's interesting to see in this episode, Cersei's leadership in contrast to Tyrion's. The way Cersei earlier in the episode, we got to get the common folk on side by instilling fear. We want them to fear us more than their enemy. Versus Tyrion, who's like, these people are about to ruin your whole life. Like, you don't need to fight for the king or whatever. You need to fight for yourselves. So I think this episode does a really good job of showing that difference between Tyrion and Cersei.
When the Gold Cloaks saw the king leaving, they lost all heart.
Now listen to me.
Don't be afraid. The Queen has raised the drawbridge. This is the safest place we can be. Joffrey's not hurt. He's fighting bravely. Should we sing a hymn?
Another interesting way to contrast Cersei's leadership with now Sansa, someone who's also been getting a bit of a parallel drawn with Cersei over the course of the season, seeing the way Sansa has now chosen to deal with this situation versus how Cersei did.
There's one told you. Next one will.
I'm going.
Where?
North. Take it to Winterfell. Do you want to go home?
I'll be safe here. Stannis won't hurt me.
Stannis is a killer. Your father was a killer. No elder is built by killers.
You won't hurt me.
Then go with him. This was a really good scene, and it reminds us of the times that the Hound has saved Sansa. And the thing about killing, everyone's a killer, the world is built by killers, that does tie back to that first scene with him and Bronn. And it makes me wish even more that that scene was better crafted so that this would then have more of that impact. I mean, look, it still does have impact on its own, but just for him to bring up something that was brought up earlier in the episode, I think it really could have elevated this episode if that earlier scene had been done well. The real question, however, is why the hell did Sansa not go with him? I'm actually baffled out of my mind why she would choose to stay here. She literally has no reason to. Like, she actually has zero reason to stay here. Maybe if they wanted, they could have thrown in a bit of an internal conflict with Sansa being like, well, without me, Cersei's kind of crazy, Joffrey's kind of crazy, I feel bad for these people. But regardless, of course she would go back to Robb. Like, what? It makes perfect sense for her character to choose to want to go with the Hound, especially with her being like, I'm not afraid of you, I know you're not going to hurt me, something that she's learned. Therefore, she knows that she can trust the Hound to take her to Winterfell or to Robb or wherever. Like, I just don't understand why she would stay here. And she's holding the doll that Ned gave her. She should know that Ned's biggest mistake was staying here. And she's been confronted with Ilyn Payne all night, the guy who killed her father. She was demeaned by Joffrey earlier in the episode. She was severely exposed to Cersei's cynicism throughout the entire episode. And somehow she's decided to stay? The only reason they did this was to drag out her story. If you can't give us a reason why Sansa would choose to stay, it's because you don't have a reason. And you're only doing it because you have other plans. You want to do X, Y, and Z. You can't figure out how to logically get Sansa to make that decision so that XYZ happens. So you just have her stay, even when given a way out. And that to me screams manufactured plotting. Like, you went through all this effort to create this relationship between the Hound and Sansa to the point where she can trust him and to the point where he's willing to go the extra mile for her. You even have him come to her room, just chilling and hoping that she'll show up instead of just leaving. But then she doesn't go. So what was the point of all that? If she doesn't choose to go, you could have had him just leave without coming here. And then she wouldn't have had that choice. You could have not given us a storyline with Sansa and the Hound leading up to this so that it would make sense that he wouldn't stop here on his way out. It just doesn't make sense to me why they would go in this direction.
Oh, fuck me.
The way that scene was crafted just felt kind of random. I didn't really get any sort of tension or emotional buildup or anything like that. It was more like, okay, they're fighting, and then here's more people coming, and then they're fighting, and then Stannis is fighting over here, and then they're fighting over here again, and Tyrion gets sliced. And that kind of takes away from the impact of Tyrion getting sliced because the scene just wasn't crafted in a way that builds up to that climactic sort of moment.
No one's going to hurt you. In the Kingswood lived a mother and her cub, wolves.
Malone.
You could hear them howling in the night. The cub was frightened.
Yeah, I knew that was Loras showing up. I didn't remember, but as soon as they showed up, I was like, yeah, that's gotta be the Tyrells.
The battle is over. We have won.
What a way to end that. Overall, Blackwater was definitely a great episode. Like I was saying just a bit earlier, I think we needed a bit more of a build-up leading to Tyrion getting slashed in the face, especially because the cavalry shows up immediately after, and we don't really get that sense of it's going downhill, it's all lost. That final moment from Tyrion's face slash to Cersei's story, and then the Tyrells and Tywin showing up, that's all well done and works great on its own, but I really wish we could have had a bit more leading up to it, because it just didn't feel like the end of the world for them, and therefore it doesn't give as much impact to the fact that Tywin saved the day, which we know is going to be a point of contention for Tyrion going forward. They told us via Lancel Lannister's dialogue that the king leaving was a huge damper on morale, but that's an instance of telling instead of showing because they didn't actually show the morale dampening. They kind of just had some people speak up, and then Tyrion had a great speech and we moved on. When the people showed up on horses to save the day, I knew right away it must have been the Tyrells, even though I didn't remember that going into this episode, but I completely forgot that Tywin shows up at the end. Last time we saw him in episode 8, he said he was leaving to get Robb, which is what prompted Arya to leave Harrenhal to try and find Robb, but then it turns out Tywin's here with the Tyrells. Now, either in episode 7 or 6, they had Littlefinger show up to tell Tywin they should team up with the Tyrells, so that sets up the groundwork for them to be saving the day in this episode. However, it does feel a bit weird that they said that Tywin was gonna go do this one thing and instead he did another, so while it makes sense for him to be here at King's Landing with the Tyrells, I hope in the next episode he maybe mentions, I decided to prioritize recruiting the Tyrells over dealing with Robb. Just anything to sort of fill in that gap, because otherwise it'll feel like they omitted something crucial just to surprise us. Also next episode, I'm sure we'll find out what happened to Davos. If I remember correctly, his son dies, but he's okay. It's interesting that they started out showing the Stannis side of the battle from Davos's perspective, but then after the ships blew up, we didn't see him again, and we didn't get the battle from that second perspective other than a few instances of Stannis leading his troops. The rest of the battle was very much from the Lannister perspective, which is certainly an interesting choice because again, it sets you up to want Tyrion to win. It's framed this way exactly for this reason. I think it goes to show that while people think the show is super morally complex and there's no good guys or bad guys and you don't know who to side with, I think that notion is entirely incorrect and I have no idea where it came from or why the show is constantly being talked about in this manner. Because like I said earlier, having Robb and Renly versus Tyrion would make for a more complex battle dynamic. Of course, as much as I disagree with the early killing of Renly, at least it did seem to have a consequence in the form of Loras siding with Tywin because he believed Stannis killed Renly. Because earlier in the season when Loras was like, I need my revenge, I was like, doesn't he not get it though? Because the storylines diverge. But I forgot he shows up here, so that was definitely a good decision. Though I still stand by the fact that the Tyrell storyline, from memory, doesn't seem to have much going on down the line apart from Joffrey's death and the church stuff. But at any rate, it's very obvious in the show who we're supposed to root for and who we're not supposed to root for. And this episode shows that it's an intentional choice to do that. It's not like they're trying to be morally complex and failing. It's that they've straight up chosen to tell you who to root for. And somehow people decided anyway that they were watching something morally gray. Now, while I wasn't completely sure, I did have a strong feeling this episode was going to be centered exclusively on Blackwater, and I think that any doubt came from wondering what else could they possibly have to do within the runtime. But I think for the most part, it was a very well-rounded episode with no filler. I've already mentioned that first scene with Bronn and the Hound, so I won't recap that here. I do, however, want to mention again that even though the episode ended well, and I understand that without Joffrey leaving, they couldn't have had Tyrion's moment and then Tywin's moment, which leads us into conflict for seasons 3 and 4, I still wish we got more from that scene of Joffrey leaving. I think this really shows how much of writing is about the choices writers make for the stories they want to tell, but those choices still have to fit within the overall scope of what the story is about. Since this is only season 2, I'm not quite sure yet if choices like Joffrey, Cersei, and Tywin's villain arcs fit into the overall scope of the show, or if the show could have had different or even better choices that still stand within the overall thematic scope and goal of the show. However, I can tell you right now that the choice to have Sansa stay here was not it. I already talked about that a lot earlier, but yeah, if you're gonna have the character choose something that actively goes against what the character would actually do, then it's definitely the wrong choice. And either you gotta have them choose the right thing, or you figure out why doing that right thing isn't right for your story, and then remove that choice from the equation. You shouldn't have to force characters to do certain things that their characters would not do just because you need the plot to go in a certain direction. And we talked about this a lot last season. But overall, this was a great episode. Great character moments for Varys, Cersei, Sansa, some interesting scenes that bring up possibilities to explore down the line. So I hope this season can end on a strong note. And with that, I will see you in the next one.